Welcome to It's Good to Catch Up, the podcast where we pull up a chair and dive into the stories of some truly incredible individuals. I am your host, Jen Lorenzini. Join me as I reconnect with some of my former colleagues, innovative entrepreneurs, groundbreaking technologists, and the everyday heroes who are making a difference. This podcast is a passion project of mine that has been in the making for some time, and I'm so delighted to finally get this off the ground. My intention is to create each episode that offers you a unique look into the lives, journeys, and insights of individuals from all walks of life. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to welcome a true pioneer in the world of educational leadership and technology, my friend, Dr. Steve Miller. With a career spanning decades, Steve has been at the forefront of innovation, working to bridge the gap between cutting-edge technology and effective learning environments. He's held impactful roles such as the Research Associate Professor at Rutgers University, founder and chief scientist at Scientific Learning, and is currently the founder and CEO of Elite Performance Solutions. Steve's expertise isn't just theoretical. It's built on a foundation of practical experience and a deep understanding of how to leverage data and technology to enhance the educational experience for both students and faculty. Where he gets my heart, he's also a passionate advocate for accessibility and inclusivity in online learning, working to ensure that educational opportunities are available to everyone. Get ready for an insightful conversation as we delve into Steve's journey, his thoughts on the future of using data to accelerate performance in education, sports, and business, as well as the lessons he's learned along the way. It's good to catch up. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, hi,
This is
nice
so
to be here.
exciting.
Yeah, very
Yay,
exciting.
yay. So you are on the very first official It's Good to Catch Up podcast. So thank you for
Wow.
being my
No, that's
first
great.
guest. This is going to be great. I'm hoping to use the ability to have made all these wonderful friends in the Bay Area and connections and share their brilliance. And so I'm excited to share you today with everyone I know. Do you want to give a little bit of background on yourself?
It's always yeah. So it's always hard to encapsulate one's background because sometimes it's based on the given day. But today I'm feeling like somebody who's worked a lot in commercial and academic areas, thinking about accelerating learning. And most people don't think about all the different industries that are so dependent on education, whether it's at Deloitte, where they're basically, their partners are always consumed with the new information they need to get and what forms of information. Can they get it in an audio form, a PowerPoint? Can they get a briefing document? Because that's how they make their living, right? They want to be and often are the smartest people on a topic, and they have to get briefed on every single thing every day. And then you have, the finance industry, and then you have education, government, military. Nobody wants to be second. And so the key is how much exposure do you need and how much can you accelerate? In this case, you want to accelerate learning for your audience. And so I'll stop introducing myself, but I did have an academic position. And then something I did got 17,000 people to call the university, which immediately back then blew the phone bank. And so they couldn't get us. So maybe they dialed a lot more, the same people. Maybe it was the same 7,000 people. But the bottom line was the university decided to transfer that technology, which was to help people with dyslexia, build better brains. And that became a company which moved me out here to California because the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center was one of our partners. They're brilliant at licensing technology. Where I was, Rutgers University was not so experienced. And so they agreed to allow UCSF to do the tech transfer. And when you're in the Silicon Valley area and you're doing a tech transfer to UCSF, it's a little bit easier to move forward than it is in Newark, New Jersey. So as I jokingly tell people, we flipped a coin: Newark or San Francisco. San Francisco is the answer. No one looked, So a group of us moved out here and started a company. The company did very well, had an IPO, and today Carnegie Learning, which is a startup out of Carnegie Mellon University, owns the rights, acquired the rights to those companies and the patents and things like that. And it's doing very well, helping kids with language problems, reading problems, and individuals trying to learn languages as a second or third language.
That's incredible. What year did you come out to the Bay Area?
What year? Mid '90s. So
Oh,
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember the exact year.
were
So,
the boys already born before you moved out this way?
so our youngest was not yet a year. So I literally called my wife from San Francisco, and we had she was on maternity leave with our youngest, and I said, "Are you?" You know, she had visited San Francisco once, and she basically said something along the lines of, "Well, I don't want to listen to you if we don't do this, so we might as well do it." And she put a sign in our front yard to sell the house before I landed. And
Wow.
then I this is why I don't know the year is I commuted back and forth at 10 to 14 day periods, living in a famous neuroscientist basically basement, and going to work, for 14, 16-hour days until I got back on an airplane and flew home. And then we moved out here in July. And
I would
so
assume that would be like 96 is
our
what it.
youngest would have been, yeah, our youngest would be probably 1 and a couple months at that time. And our oldest was 2, almost 3. And so, yeah, so things were going well. But yeah, like anything, I had a great supporting cast in the sense that my wife got on an airplane unemployed and landed, and we went to people's houses to collect pots and pans because the truck delivering stuff wasn't going to show. And I was lucky enough to have good friends who were like, "Here's a box with some pots and pans." One of the co-founders, Bill Jenkins, a scientist, gave us a bunch of VCR tapes and a VCR player with a little TV set so the kids could watch Disney. Well, you never think about that. You're like, "Oh, we're going to do all this traveling thing. We haven't seen the house." I had seen it, but Lori hadn't seen the house. And so, yeah, so everything went well. And over decades, she has explained to me how she really felt. But, but it really, I mean, it really goes down to, for so many people, you work hard, but you can only work hard if there's somebody taking care of the other stuff,
You
right?
don't have to tell me twice because I was a single mom and
Yeah. So you had nobody take care of the other stuff except your other personality for that
yeah,
day.
there's
Yeah.
plenty up here too. I let people know. That's one of the coolest things about doing this podcast is this is very focused on people I've met growing up in the Bay Area. But who I've met also depends on the persona that they've met. We met over our boys playing baseball,
Hmm.
and that's where I fell in love with you and your family. You've always come off as just a very sage person who has incredible advice, incredible statistics, which always gets my kind of curiosity of how the world works. And you've raised incredible humans, and you have an incredible wife as well. So I love you
Hmm.
guys like from soup to nuts. Every single Miller is just a great friend.
Yeah.
Your work in education, what was kind of the first aha moment that you had that you were on the right track?
Wow. So on the right track. So
Because you've had incredible
sure.
success.
Yeah, no,
Um,
no. I've been very lucky, but part of it is that I grew up in a not economically advantaged part of Pennsylvania.
mhm.
Again, it wasn't, we were like our neighbors, so it wasn't as if, I felt like I was lacking or had some desire, or grudge for individuals that had more. But, going about business is going about your business. And so I learned very early on to have a pretty aggressive work ethic. And so, my grandmother was my elementary school principal for a short period, and then she retired. And it was the kind of family where if it snowed and she beeped the horn in front of the house, you went out and shoveled walks with her until, for friends and for her and for others, until she brought you home and you had cocoa. You didn't think about were you going to get money or not. It was just kind of like that's what you did. And so every day started when people were ready to go do something and they finished when you retired. And so, we didn't, again, not lacking for anything. I had a lot of rich family experiences. And then my parents got divorced when I was a teen. and that increased the need for me to work. And so then I had to work for people and get paid. And I think I won't say every job, but I've had many, many, many jobs in my life all the way through college. So I played college football, but I also worked for the Department of Psychology. And so while I was working there, I had great experiences with some faculty. And so what I got a chance to do was do brain research on non-humans, but directly. So I had my own rats. And we did some experiments on the effects of various hormones and drugs, to look at things that impacted aggressive behavior and attention and diet, all things that we care about today.
Ironically.
Ironically, yeah.
But not ironically.
So I've accomplished very little, obviously, since I started out in those areas. But and then I went to graduate school, and I was still working with non-humans, and I really was got some experience in Hartford, Connecticut, at a place called the Institute of Living, where they had people with psychiatric issues. And near my hometown was a psychiatric hospital. And so I kind of got fascinated with this idea that people with neurological problems had very little awareness of their neurological problem. So it's not as
what does that look like?
Well, so for me, again, my bias and ignorance, I thought when somebody heard a voice, like they could tell the difference. Right? Versus they really, that voice is as real as your voice is, and my voice in my own head to myself is, right? And I kind of got that gist. Now, I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but I was blown away by the idea that, like, wow, how do you differentiate your realities if you completely believe what's going on? And then what happened was, I was, again, a young scientist. And so there was a big meeting, and I co-opted my way into the big meeting, not as a presenter, because they weren't going to let me talk at all. These were all the most prominent people in the field of neuroscience and dyslexia. And but I was willing to carry every piece of electronics, show up 2 hours early, plug them all in, make sure they all worked, basically prep the room. And then make sure that the people who come early, because most people who are good at their profession go to the room early. They want to see their slides. They want to see, well, I think people don't know that, right? Like it was, for me, it wasn't a secret, but you'd go to things early and you'd be like, hey, here is somebody who might win the Nobel Prize and eventually does win the Nobel Prize. And you're like, they come early and they have their slide carousel checked and they're watching and they're looking, and then they either sit down and want to relax a little bit, not be bothered, but relax, or they'll even come back.
I'll tell you, getting into those rooms early, or even acknowledging the support staff coming in there, they're watching. So anytime somebody wants to get in front of a leader, I think that's great advice of get into the room early, also befriend and be kind to everybody as you're going in, because you never know who's who on the other side of it.
Well, so just to give you an example, so one of the great examples was very famous neurology group out of Yale was giving a talk. And, very often it's kind of like, if somebody looks and says, hey, Jen, will you get me a coffee? Some people will sit there and go, oh, why are they asking me why I'm getting coffee? Instead, I'd be like, sure. And I get myself one and I'd get them one and I'd bring it up and I'd go, hey, is this how you like it? Right? Not thinking about anything else. So, they had their slides in upside down and backwards, right? So when their slide went, it was backwards on the screen, and they're up on the stage. They're doing their prep, and they have 2 carousels, right? For people that don't know what that is, that means every individual image they're going to show is in a little bracket. And so I looked and I said, hey, I went back and I started to help them. And while they were talking, I was exchanging the slides. So I was 1 slide ahead, then 10 slides ahead, then I was on the second carousel. I just did it. No one said, again, people were like, why did you do that? You shouldn't have to do that. And I'm like, person in trouble, I'm going to help them. And I've had that from going to conferences, and I hold the elevator for somebody and they're carrying a box. And so I go, hey, can I help you carry that? And then we get out of the elevator, which is, I think, funny. I'm carrying a box and the person I'm carrying it for is next to me. I don't realize that she is the big name in the room that I'm about to go to. And she knows that. She knows I don't know who she is, right? We go in and somebody sits there and says, oh, you two know each other. And I go, met her in the parking lot. And they're like, oh, you're one of those people that goes up to people in the parking lot you don't know. And I go, I helped a person carry a box that they couldn't carry well. Like and she held the elevator for him, like it's just that kind of thing. And so very often I think that gets communicated, and it's not something you can write in a cover letter when you apply for something. Like I want to get a grant or I want to get a project. You go, I will do whatever it takes to make sure that it is successful for the team to have a great outcome, right? Whether that's done this for the California State Board. Somebody got a flat tire. I took them to AAA, to get the car, the tire change, right? I mean, it's just, it's not
service.
But
Always
you get
service, yeah.
But you get a few minutes with them. And so my best ever story, with a little touch of, Steve's personal ignorance, I'm at a university, and again, I work weekends. I come in early. I'm taking care of stuff. And they said, there's a VIP coming to the university for a tour. Would you mind walking around with them and making, just show them what building A to B, just don't get lost. They have a tour guide. And I go, yeah, I'm around, no problem. I don't know who it is. No idea. VIP. It was Elie Wiesel, right? And so, yeah. And so I'm sitting there like the next day, I don't have a phone with internet, I'm sitting there going like.
We didn't have LinkedIn on our devices back then.
I'm like, I know he wrote a book, but I can't remember what it was called. Like, I can't remember anything about the book. I mean, I know it's about the Holocaust, not. Mm-hmm. And he comes and he's got guys with earbuds and, who are his security because he's, he has, at that time, his life was threatened. Yeah. And I'm just like, he's like, hey, is there anything you want to know? I said, what do you think I should know about what you're currently trying to get across to people? Because I don't know what to ask him. And he spends 45 minutes, invites me to have lunch with him at his table, and it's just one of those things where it's you sit down and, you're nice and you let somebody cut in line so they can be the next person to get their food because they're in a rush, to anything. You just do that kind of stuff. And usually, if you do it 100 times, 90, but 10 times it might be the best thing you have. And then years later, you can share that, experience. So, you always, but it is that way. It's like somebody sits there and it's like, if you cut them off, you might regret it. If you let them in, you might benefit. Like for me, it was like an easy.
I love how you're really giving this background into being a person of service, because education is not a selfish game. Equitability in education is definitely not a selfish game. When you were kind of up and coming and getting everything off the ground and coming to California to kind of start these adventures, or ventures, we'll say. Some of them were adventures and some of them are just ventures. What was the environment that you were able to build at these companies with your perspective that you think was really impactful in making them successful?
Well, so I think, you go back and you said kind of like, when was the moment? We did a study.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And in that study, we had kids who had diagnosed learning disabilities show up for a summer camp, and they showed enormous gains. So on a standardized test, and this always sounds sad, but if you read the literature, you'll see that half a standard deviation is kind of like the average benefit that some kids get in school. You think like, well, that means they went to school for 9 months, they got 6 of benefit, or 10 and 6, something like that. It's not a great story, right? But so when you go through and somebody can get a 1.5 year gain from an intervention, again, on standardized test, doesn't mean in their real world they're 1.5 years ahead. They could be more, they could be less, but testing is what the world is, how we measure ourselves in those studies. So we had really huge gains. We withheld publishing it because it sounded too good. And we waited a year and reran another summer school with randomized assignment and 2 groups of kids. And that's what got published in a journal. But I think in general, what really happened, just like the idea that we didn't publish something right away, we had a culture of being results driven and wanting to not make mistakes, right? So it was kind of like, it's not as important as sending somebody to space on on a spaceship, where like if you make a mistake, it's really a bad day for them.
The Challenger explosion was part of my core memory as a child. So yeah. Yeah.
And so, so NASA does, but that's that same mentality. You're like, look, you're going to work hard. You're going to, 6 Sigma kind of errors are allowed, and you're okay. And this is where I think it really changes, is you have to have an ego where you can say, Jen's going to check my work, right? And then I'm going to check Jen's work. And, I was at a company called Neurofocus where part of the bonus that people got was on the signal quality of the data they collected.
Hmm.
And
What does
so,
that, what does that look like? The signal quality of data?
well, again, and I'm actually looking at a study right now. So there are models that will say whether it looks like either the next study will have a big impact on the direction of the results, or that you might be cherry picking and there might be studies out there that don't have good results that they call them the file in the drawer, right? There's like results that you don't want people to see, and you said, oh, I'm going to change that, but you don't share that information. So in our case, I'm doing one now on science learning. The results have to be reviewed, they have to be peer reviewed. But right now, the math says that there would need to be 8,000 studies before the result probably isn't true, because I'm doing 29 studies that say the trend is reliably,
Nice.
and the error doesn't hit zero. So right now, 99 out of 100 studies all have a positive benefit for the individuals in the classroom. And so I think I don't want to be unfair because this isn't what I make my living out of. But I think when you look at what work there's been done by really good scientists out there, usually what happens is in psychology, anywhere, education research, very few things are replicated. I hate to say that, but it's just a fact. So today, if you want to go to, there's a tutoring website. I think it was started by Johns Hopkins. Great place, by the way. But you want to find the 10 top tutoring programs. And so they'll say, well, research quality matters and experimental design matters. So we want randomized control groups. And then you read it and it's like, this is what it is. This is what it costs for kids. This study really works. And there's really good programs out there. Lindemood Bell program is a really great reading intervention program. But when you go look, they only have one study that meets the definition that the research community says is kind of the gold standard. So you're like, wait, we're betting everything on one result done by, prominent scientists, but mistakes can happen. They're not running 1,000 kids. They're running a couple hundred kids, maybe. Some cases they're running 30 kids, right? They're running a classroom. And so you're kind of like, if we replicate it, so my opinion is if you can replicate a study, that means more to whether or not you're going to get the same answer, right? If you're a teacher, that's what you want to know. So, and I'll give you an example. I was once at a meeting and I knew the research really well. And so they asked teachers to do an intervention.
Kind of an intervention.
Reading. And you have to really be able to articulate speech sounds incredibly clearly.
Like a phonetic kind of approach.
Right. Okay. Our U.S. Department of Ed, when it's fully funded and fully resourced, believes, though, that if you're teaching kids language skills like articulation, that's actually language development, not reading development, because there's no print. That's why phonetics has always been argued about. Phonetics is the world of speech language pathology, not reading instruction. Print reading, connecting those speech sounds to print, is reading instruction. So if you're only teaching kids the speech sounds and they're having problems, that's usually what happens with speech language pathologists. That's what they're going to help kids with. Pat Lindemood, who has the great reading program, she passed, but she was a speech language pathologist.
Just a quick pause on this.
Sure.
You have little children coming up in your family line at this point.
Yeah.
Would you be giving the advice to teach reading through phonetic or through sight words?
Oh, no, absolutely phonetically. I'm saying, but conceptually, the argument in the academic community is not based on what is the best way for a kid to learn.
Oh, that's right. Because it would be different depending on the kid as well.
It's really like having a psychiatrist argue with a neurologist.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And you're or a psychologist and a psychiatrist, right? They're not arguing on what's the best way to move somebody or whether somebody with depression needs help. They're arguing from their view of the disorder, and many of them believe it. But in the end, they're all looking for what they've been trained to do, which is their business, and their business hasn't really taught them about the other perspective as much. So in education, kids with broken language learning systems, if they're bad, they go see a speech language pathologist first, or if they have professionals in their family who know about the area, right? If they're not so bad, then they're seen for reading instruction, because in third grade they're behind. When the University of Georgia, a guy named George Hind, Hynd, George went out and looked at his dyslexics, and he gave them a speech and language test. And was talking to him and he said, oh my goodness, he said, all these kids have bad speech and language development, right?
In the
The Colorado,
he was in the state of Georgia at the time.
well, he was in the state of Georgia, but his mindset was around reading.
Okay.
So if you give a reading test, you can only be bad at reading. To test speech and language, you have to give a speech and language test. And in psychology programs, they're not taught speech and language tests. The world of the speech and language pathologist, which is another department on campus, they learn speech and language development. They don't learn reading instruction. So here's this thing, and you as a general knowledge person, you said, well, it's phonetic. But when you say phonetic, there's no print. So that's why I had to kind of pause and clarify. So you're 100% right. Developmentally, if you can't hear the speech sounds and you can't represent them as discrete, fluent units, you're going to have problem learning print, of course.
Yeah, just so you know, my child initially struggled with reading until Mrs. Howell or Miss Costuris, I forget which one of them, is at Holy Trinity, love that school, introduced a phonetic song that actually had there was a song, and as soon as he learned the song, he went from being behind in class to 2 grades ahead, and it kicked off a great experience.
Yeah. So what we did, so when you said so I went to a university with a grant, and the grant allowed me to work with a speech language pathologist at a university, and allowed me to work with a famous child psychologist, right? So Paula Talal was the psychologist at Rutgers. And that grant allowed me to have them kind of have that, I won't say argument, but to have their different views represented. Paula understood the connection between the sounds. In fact, that was her theory. They were connected. And so she believed that the speech sounds that were the fastest moving acoustically, the pa, da, cuz of speech, were harder for kids to learn than the e, ah, o, because you can hold those forever. You can't hold ba forever. You can hold the ah part, but the ba is an explosive event, right? It's very short. So I used to jokingly say you go ba, right? And that was the only way to say it slow. So we used digital technology from computers to slow them down just a few milliseconds, and that enhanced the kid's ability to discriminate it. So if we found a child who had problems picking up those acoustic cues when they heard a song, we could slow it down. It's like slowing down a pitch. So because we both share a baseball background, right? So if you can't hit a 90-mile-an-hour pitch, can you hit an 80? It's a lot easier, right? If you can hit an 80, can you hit a 70? It's a lot easier, right? In fact, when kids are little, we put it on a tee, so it doesn't move at all, right?
Yeah.
And we still use that tee all the way through Major League Baseball, right? And so, but in the educational world, how do you get a slower pitcher, or where's the tee come from, right? And so that's where the different phonetic-based reading approaches come from. But even today, they're having a science war about how to teach reading. And I would argue it's less about comparing kids in 2 programs to see who accelerates, as much as it is the domain of general knowledge that the argument is occurring on, so that you're not going to allow a reading teacher to learn speech and language training because it's not considered domain. So the U.S. Department of Ed, when we submitted that slowing down the speech signal, they put us in English language acquisition, even though we were helping kids learn phonological awareness, decoding, right? And so for me, the amazing part was using the acoustics in speech helped kids learn reading by a year and a half. So the magical part wasn't so much, it was that we applied technology to help us empirically challenge 2 competitive models. But again, they're not going to stop fighting, right? I mean, it's not, that argument just won't really disappear. There will always be people out there who go, it's the rich, and it is. It's great stories that help kids want to read, right? Yeah. It's being engaged and inquisitive, but kids who struggle still need to be given the basics on, their swing technique and what baseball's about. But there are some kids who just love baseball and they'll go out and try whatever people give them until they find the way.
Was that technology able to help with the different learning styles and identify how different children learn? You have the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, the reading, writing. I am a kinesthetic learner. Reading, writing wasn't, I struggled with it as a kid because my attention span was, it was non-existent. So how did the technology kind of help with those different types of learning abilities?
Right. So I'm going to try to pay homage to the people doing this work because their work's important. So most humans learn more with these things than they do with any other sense modality because it's got better range and it's so obvious, right? So somebody who loses vision, right? I'm wearing corrective glasses, right? So the first thing that happened, the New York Times science writer who heard about our work called our work glasses for the ears because
Oh, very nice. That's a nice compliment.
we were acoustically modifying speech the way visually we modify wavelengths, right? So but the people that do learning styles would say everybody's better visually who has normal vision, right? Now, within your own domains, tactile, auditory, etc., you can have heightened levels relative to others. So you can be a visual system. It's not like you can't see, but auditorily you get a bump that other people don't necessarily get, right? So just to be fair to them. And then, but yeah, absolutely. And so when you think about like the Kindle, right? Amazon wanted to better understand how they could integrate, make more sales, right? With reading a book, print, versus listening to it, and how could they integrate those? So could Jen be reading a book and then go to the auditory book on her treadmill and have it go right to the same page, right? And and your personal settings and everything else that goes on. So I think that it is about access. And then, of course, some people like paper books. Some people like digital books. Some people can read on their phone. I can't read a story. I can't read a book on my phone. It doesn't matter what I want. Like, it's just not, that's not going to work for me. And so, but I think in general, that was it. And then Mike Merznick, so I already mentioned some of the key people. Mike Merznick was the person when I sat in a room and there's all these great neurologists and psychologists. Mike is a neuroscientist, so he's trying to understand the neuroscience of learning. Mike was part of the team that developed the cochlear implant.
Okay.
Neurologists were looking for the broken area in the brain for dyslexics. And psychologists were trying to figure out how to fix the broken part.
Is it broken?
Well, Mike came in and said, whether it's broken or not, the amount of damage is minuscule. And what it really is an enormous amount of bad practice. So if you were a golf coach, so think about a teacher, right? So this was my dissertation was going to be revealed in the following kind of example. So if you're a good golf coach, and in come the famous twin brothers, and they're both 40, and they have exactly the same game, right? They both are horrible, but they're horrible to the same level of horrible.
Okay.
Right? One brother has played for 15 years, 3 times a week. The other brother has played 15 times in his life. Who do you think you can have a bigger impact as a coach with almost, in 3 months, right?
As player B?
Right. The player with very little experience because they have no bad habits to break. So Mike Merznick said, when kids are 4 or 5, they go to school, but they have 4 years of rich experience learning how to ignore the critical cues that matter when you want to learn to read. And so they've been playing bad listener for millions and millions of times, right? And it's their game. It is their game. You can't convince them it's not a good game. It's the only game they know. So you've got to convince them to give up the bad swing, kind of Charles Barkley-like, right, in golf. Give up the bad swing so they can learn the new one. And then you got somebody who just never played, right? And so for me, my aha moment was when I sat there and I thought to myself, so wait, how do we hold back bad learning or ineffective learning reps? And so there was a famous neuroscientist, Ed Taub, T-A-U-B, who was at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Ed was working in individual kids that had developmental disorders in the motor system. And what Ed had discovered for individuals who have strokes, right? So a stroke, we have a defined area where there's a bleed. We have visible brain damage. And if you had brain damage in a particular area and you have a normal organization, your right arm doesn't work. Can't talk, right arm doesn't work. Okay, that's why we put those pills in our left hand, our left pocket. So Ed tries to put people through physical therapy, right? Or occupational therapy. He discovers that if he takes their bad hand, remember their bad hand is their right hand, he takes it and he forces them to use it, not in therapy, they have to do that anyway, but therapy is only 40 minutes once or twice a week. Right. If you don't have good insurance, it's even less, right? So Ed takes the good arm, he ties it to the person's body. It's called constraint-induced therapy. It's like patching an eye. Now, you can't do that all day, but he found in some of his patients 80% recovery in an elderly brain after a stroke of the bad hand if he made them use it. Because what happens is, from a learning perspective, as the hands are competing for brain space, you're learning to tie your shoe with one hand, you're getting dressed with one arm, you're eating with one arm, you're doing everything with one arm, you're getting better, you stop practicing this. So I was sitting there going like, this is crazy. Like, so wait, these kids with learning problems actually have learning problems. They've been practicing bad learning a lot. And then when we look developmentally at exposure rates, kids who read 10 or 15 minutes a day more than other kids are exposed to 1 million more words a year. And so what happens is the kid who's not good avoids those other behaviors and basically keeps digging a hole, right?
I might have been that kid. I'm gonna let you know right now. I was a bad student as a kid, but yeah, I had bad habits for sure.
Yeah. But you, so you get the, right, you have this, and so I met people where they were like, I never read at all as a kid. My mother was an attorney. My father was, I don't remember what he was, but, and so because I didn't read a lot, but my parents made me listen to them read out loud in the living room every night. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if you sat there and read the book yourself, you're learning word knowledge, right? So it's not whether you can see it or hear it. It's was there a systematic engagement for you to build that vocabulary? And some of that is equity in the family, right? And some of it isn't. And if you grew up in a family without a lot of equity, educationally or financially, it's hard to catch up. And so what I looked at in North Carolina, in Forsyth County, North Carolina, was I started assessing kids' brains for colors and speech sounds and the speed of their brain systems before they ever went to school. Because I believed that, from my grandmother and from other teachers, that teachers could predict kids that were going to be struggling in third grade if they met them in kindergarten. So I gave teachers a couple weeks experience with the student. I had them rank order the kids and just say who they thought would be struggling. If the teacher had more than 1 year experience, they were about 80% good without having to give a formal assessment. Colleagues were out there giving great assessments and going 96% correct. And I'm going, okay, so out of 30 kids, you get 29, I get 27, or I get 26. We're missing 1 or 2 kids, right? You probably know we're missing the girl because boys that struggle act out. Girls that struggle don't act out as much. And so we do miss that struggling girl, right? And so, I jokingly say, because we have a lot of boys in our family, that the best compliment a teacher can give you is that your son is doing so well, he's almost a girl, right? Because the distribution for girls outperform boys early in development. So if you're a bad girl, you're actually an average boy.
Yeah, that tracks. That tracks for me.
Well, no, but I mean, but then think about it. We don't have separate tests for boys and girls at that age.
We've also starved research into women, young women, little girls.
And we're going to continue that. We're going to continue that today, aren't we? Because now, if you say I want to study gender effects, you may not get a grant.
Yeah, it's devastating because you also. It's devastating is the word, by the way. I think that's really the word. Is I think that if I had been diagnosed ADD a lot earlier, even if it was prevalent, you would have been like, yeah, no, that's Jennifer. She can tell a story. If you're telling a story, if you write it out, I remember I got so into math in the 5th grade because they started having these different kind of math events, and they brought us out to Berkeley, and all of a sudden that was where I skyrocketed in math and understanding and really accelerated my path. But before then, no, I wasn't doing anything. So sorry, I always get you off track.
Well, no, but part of the equity for you was you lived in an area of great scientific knowledge. The commencement speaker at Harvard yesterday said very clearly, he's like, if he's an immigrant physician, and he said, they don't always get the best gigs, the best jobs. And sometimes, they're working in more rural communities. And so, right, if you graduate from the University of Pennsylvania, because I'm from Pennsylvania, medical school, you're not going to my town to work. And, and so we're getting somebody who's not from the University of Pennsylvania, or didn't do as well, or has a different reason for living there, right? So there's an equity that you being able to go visit Berkeley and just get dunked in it and see men and women walking the campus and go, they don't look that different from me.
Yeah, shout out Mrs. Gray. She was the teacher who I can remember. She even spelled it Grey. I was just like, oh, Gray, Miss Gray. She was amazing. Kind of circle it back to all the technology that you've been able
Sure.
to influence. What do you, so one, you moved to the Bay Area in the late 90s. Talk about an incredible time to be here. And that's kind of the premise of me starting this podcast is, boy, am I lucky to be raised here, just in proximity to the great innovations that would happen, the funding that was happening in different sectors. We don't have just one industry in the Bay Area. We do have education, learning, science, pharmaceuticals, you name it. We've got it all here. FinTech, Visa also, is like from here. Right. What are your top 3 things, maybe in technology, that, boy, are you glad that we've gotten to when it comes to education and research, so that possibly we can start to enact some of the recommendations that you have faster? Because you've always had these incredible stories. You've always amazed me with like, hey, did you know this? And I'm like, why doesn't everybody know that? Yeah. So I guess in a why doesn't everybody know that moment, like what are some technology or stories that we should make sure that people know?
Well, so the good or bad, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to deal with the good.
So
I think in large part, I'm maybe unlike a lot of people, I'm incredibly excited by AI.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Because I think most of us are human and we have biases, right? So when I look at a great teacher and we think about who a great teacher is, we often think about the personal experience. A great teacher engaged me or talks, but a good teacher, when you're looking at statistics, is somebody who moves everybody, right? Is a teacher great who misses 10 kids out of 30? Not bad, unless you're one of those 10 kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I look at variance in a classroom as they move performance-wise. If you can move 26, 27, 28 kids, so we undervalue education in general, and we don't know how to value teachers. Large part because teachers typically, historically, are really good at the verbal SAT compared to the nonverbal performance SAT. So language is their sweet spot. So they're really good at discussing their position, having influence on the average person out there verbally, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's their great. And again, it's a bias. They're not even aware that as easy it is for them to communicate, right, with children and others. When I look, and I put some data up for myself, but when I look, right, so you just say, what's the average person make? So I'll pose it as a question. So you're my science collaborator. So we want to improve school performance so that kids can have better jobs. Mm-hmm. Right? We all kind of hope that. And then we say,
we'd love to invest in the future of our economy. Yes.
So if I want to start tracking kids and look at their impact on the economy, I've got to look at their work life. And their work life is in part dependent on Social Security age and other things like that. But let's just assume it's 40 years. I know that sounds scary, right? Especially if you're young, you're sitting there kind of going, but I always say to people who are like, well, doesn't matter. So 40 years they have from when they finish high school. They have college in there, but college goes to, they could work or they could go to college and owe money, right? So they're going to go to school, and on average, even if they didn't go to college, they will make more in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math jobs than they will in other jobs, okay? And that's even with the bizarre thought that healthcare is not a STEM career, which by definition, it is excluded. I see you're making a face.
Yeah.
It's just the way the world's carved. I got nothing to do with
before COVID, I would have thought that all doctors needed science, but now
and nurses.
There are people out there with that who didn't go to medical school that would like to tell doctors what to do. So.
But in the world of carving out things, healthcare is pushed to the side, and historically, according to our U.S. Bureau of Job Statistics, healthcare is not a STEM career. So even with them pulled out, you make more in STEM, and you make more in a STEM job with good STEM courses. If you graduate high school, if you don't graduate high school, if you graduate with a bachelor's degree, you graduate with a master's degree, right? It goes up and up and up. So let's just forget about college, and let's just say you have a good science teacher. And we test science primarily in 8th grade is the last year, right? Our current administration just decided to decrease the amount we're going to test things because, Can't have a problem if we don't test for it. So, we're going to save some money and test some of those courses half as much. Okay. So 8th grade science. So now an 8th grade science teacher, we can look at an average science teacher and say, what does the average kid make in 40 years if they have an average science teacher? And I'm going to say it's about $3 million. That's pretty good, right? But it's 40 years of working, right? I'm not removing money for taxes, just saying this is what they can make if they, if for some reason they never have an expense, right? So that's $3 million, right? If that teacher is at the 60th percentile, just a quarter of a standard deviation better, and has 30 kids in the class, then those 30 kids will make $600,000 more than they would have if they didn't have her. They just had average.
Just in the 8th grade, just by ending it in the 8th grade. Curious.
She just teaches 1 year of her life, and she's above average, the 60th percentile for science teachers. I'm being, I'm always picking a she, but the teacher, right, walks away. Those kids, because they had a better science teacher, on average, should make about $600,000 more as a collective. So divide that by 30, right? If she's at the 69th percentile, it's 1.2 million.
Yes, now, please. And sign up, everybody.
Here's the scary part. You ready for the scary part?
What's the statistic of what we have?
There's symmetry of that. So I was dealing with average and above average. So if you have a below average science teacher, we're losing 1.2 million from the local economy.
Let's define teacher really quick. Let's define.
Again, I'm just talking about the curriculum instruction, which is student engagement, good curriculum product, and a human who is responsible for getting through that instructional content in a safe and accepting way.
I think that's the key indicator of the definition of teacher, right? Like in tech, we're always defining what's the definition of done so that we understand definition of done. And I think the definition of teacher is not only their capabilities, but it's also their course material, the willingness of the children, also the economic opportunities of those kids to actually have time to digest and learn and not worry about hunger.
And they have good food. Right. Yeah, that's right.
We were getting there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do not hide how disappointed I am in this war on teachers that we currently seem to have, and opinions about teachers from people that I've never seen sit down with their kid and read. And I was also, I was a single mom, so I had to over-index on teachers and hoping they were picking up for me when I couldn't.
But we don't
unfair.
have this.
That was unfair.
We don't have arguments about the salaries of anybody else in the world except teachers. We don't really argue about policemen. We don't argue about firemen. We all feel the same about CEOs, but they still make more money every single, right? But teachers, they just get whipped on. They just get pounded with how much. And the horrible part is teachers have contributed to that mission-driven economic situation they're in because they're the first ones who yell about people getting paid. In other words, usually if somebody gets paid more, you go, congratulations, I'm going to ask for a raise. Like NFL quarterbacks don't go in and complain. They go in and say, wow, that's awesome. I can't wait till my contract's up. Right. And so somehow in the public service sector, we treat education in a unique way in the sense that we think as a public, everybody in education, even education technology companies, should be mission driven, not profitable driven. Why? Where is that lot? If we believe it's the backbone for success for our community, right? Because those kids that make 1.2 million more, and if the teacher's at the 84th percentile, they make 2.5 million more. One group of kids, 30.
And that's just 8th grade. That's not even introducing it earlier.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter whatever grade that science teacher's in, they're contributing towards those kids having it. So if they have a bad teacher the next year, knock that down. So it's really the summative element of the science teaching for that group across those years. But a good teacher, right? Again, you and I have talked about this. I'm sure Steve Jobs could have identified his favorite teacher who impacted his thinking, right? I have met John Chambers. I have met lots of CEOs, John Doerr and others who have talked about their challenges with learning. And so I believe, I apologize if it's not, but I believe it was John Chambers who talked about, he got private tutoring at home for his reading. And so people wouldn't know.
So just to hit, so this was a conversation that we've had offline,
Right.
and I'll just make sure that we kind of touch on it here, is our current education system and all of the research you're currently doing is trying to identify ways that we can have
A good economy.
good economy and good educational opportunities so
Yeah.
that we can have great innovators like a Steve Jobs or like a Bill Gates or
Yeah.
you name it.
Who make the
I know
world
that
more
Bill went to,
equitable. Yeah.
by the
Who
way, and
try to make
also,
the who
yeah,
try to make the world more equitable in their efforts. They're not trying. I mean,
yeah,
they of course want the profit for, for their organization, for themselves, but the internet has made the world a little bit more equitable. Just has, right?
data, yeah.
And so for me, the issue was what's the best predictor of international competition or regional competition for California or for San Mateo, where Silicon Valley is, or the US? It's math and science scores. So reading, everybody expects you to be able to read. I'm not minimizing it. But if you're a good reader, it doesn't necessarily give you a better income. If you're better at science and math, it's like knowing a foreign language that nobody else can speak.
Right,
Right?
right.
If you don't know math and somebody talks math in front of you, you could go in a room with a blank sheet of paper and just say, like, I hope this is over soon because I have no idea what to put on this. Like, I have no idea how to solve this, right? And so we right now, as you know, we have talked, we're not racing to the top
Yeah.
in those international scores. And in fact, if you ask most people in the US, where is it best, they don't say the US, right? And so now the good news is we have high performing students who are as good as any. And the state of Massachusetts is probably our highest performing state among
Statistically,
states.
yes,
And
absolutely. Yep.
if you just took Massachusetts and you said Massachusetts is a country called the United States and put them in a competitive landmark, we look a lot better. So the educational programs will say, see, we're not doing a bad job educationally. We're just having problems with those kids that aren't in Massachusetts, right? And then they give those kids labels, right? And so the odd part for me is when you look across these educational domains in science and math, we have fewer kids than we had 20 years ago.
Do we really have fewer kids today than we did 20 years ago?
Yeah, we just had a 10% decrease in the last 3 years of birth.
Interesting.
So, because we're older.
Yeah.
And so when the older people were having kids, they had 2.5 kids to
Yep.
3.5 kids. Today's kids are not having 3 kids on average. And then there's the really weird part, which is going to get you a lot of pings, and so don't forward the email to me, but a lot of pings, and that is people who are born in the USA have fewer kids than people who become U.S. citizens legally through immigration.
That was my experience growing up. Was the
And
first generation families had a lot more kids than
yes,
my family did.
and biologically they're more fertile.
Bring it.
No, but I'm just saying it's not because it's not just a mindset. There's something that we do in the way that we have organized our world in organized countries, in countries that are cityfied, I guess, where we are not as fertile as long as somebody who grows up in a country that doesn't have all that stuff, but still wants to come here because of the economic opportunities. And everybody who has large families, the goal was to have a large family. It wasn't, hey, we budgeted and we could make it, because on paper, right, kids aren't money makers.
No, well,
Right? They're cost centers, right? So, in the business mindset, right? So,
yeah.
but I think that people don't understand that so schools are getting smaller
Mm-hmm.
than they used to be in, definitely the 80s, but they probably won't pick back up until the 30s. And so right now schools are having a problem with teacher salaries, maintenance, pensions, and the pension problem is going to impact all public service areas, because you can't retire after 20 years, make 50% to 100% of your salary. I mean, you just think about it. Let's go back to our 40-year working, right? So if at 20 years you retire and you get a pension, then you continue on your pension life. I'll do it this way, right? And a new person gets hired, and right, they're over here. So now at the end of 20 years, you've been getting a pension for 20. You're going to live another 20 because you're only 60, right? The other person's getting a pension. So we now have 2 people on a pension, and we're going to hire a guy or gal to do their job. So we're going to have 3 salaries coming out of what? Coming out of what tax base, right? No, I mean, it's just, so England knows and has this problem, right? Europe knows and has this problem, and they're all trying to achieve. You heard France just delayed the mandatory retirement age,
Hmm.
right?
With some uproar.
Right. And so I don't know what the answer is, but we're having more of an awakening. But the awakening is coming, at a great rub. And I'm not again. I don't know. I just know the math,
Yeah.
and the math is most people should be thinking about, when your son was born, the estimated probability that he's going to live to be 90 is pretty high. So think about it. People's retirement age in their mind is set on their grandparents,
Hmm.
who might have lived to 72 or 73.
Yeah.
So they were retiring at 65,
Yeah.
right? So 65, 7 years of pension wasn't breaking the back of the system. But if they're going to live to be 95 and they retire at 65, right? And I often say to people, I'm like, wow, you are awesome. Like you saved enough in that time period to retire. That is kudos, right? And so what really happens is people save enough in their area and then they relocate to another area, taking the benefits of the pension for that region, which that pension was created so they could live in that area and not leave, right? Because when the union went and argued, they didn't sit there and say, well, in West Virginia, you can live, like they were sitting there kind of going, you can't afford to live here if we don't pay these guys more or gals, right?
That's also part of the issue they have on the peninsula with law enforcement is they take their salary. One, you got to make the game work for you. I absolutely believe you got to make the game work for you. But I also believe that your law enforcement should be part of the community in which it polices so that they have a vested interest. And one of the concerns was that most of those police officers were, moving up to Sacramento because they could get the better bang for their buck. I might have a sibling who did the same thing,
or Arizona,
or Arizona. Yeah, but they can come
or-
down and stay overnight.
or
And I
Nevada.
think, you get into these kind of this funkiness. So let's
Well, it's not funky. I'm just saying that we love all those people that work in those service industries, and especially the first responders.
Yep.
We love teachers because we trusted them with our kids and they spent more hours with them than we did, or at least I did, right? And so, in general, kudos to them, and we want them, but people have to understand the economics. So my goal wasn't to criticize or change their pension. My goal was to say, if 45% of the kids are learning enough science to make money, what if we got to 80%?
The economic boom would be incredible enough to wash out the need for additional revenue for teachers. You'd be able to cover it.
And additional kids.
Oh, what a game. So that's it. That's what everybody.
Well, that's not it. We still have to, right? But so the issue was in San Mateo County, if we can move kids up, we have a bigger economy than Florida in San Mateo alone, because we have venture capital, because we have all these things that we already have. Oregon would move up, Florida would move up. Like, we can all of a sudden, and like you said, somebody goes to work at Apple, and this just happened with iPhones, right? Yeah. So you hire somebody to make your iPhone, and then business needs change or the model changes and you can't afford them anymore. So you cut them loose and go to a new manufacturer, but they go and build something else for a competitor legally. And so you have this cross generation of information where the knowledge that was used in an iPhone might get made for Starbucks and a coffee maker, or in a hospital, right, for another device, or for another phone company, right? And so that crosstalk is critical towards innovation in the region. It's a parallel equity more than it's a direct derivative of that knowledge of science. It's now I got a job at Xerox PARC, and look what Xerox PARC created, right? Good and bad. We have email because of it, right? We have Apple computers. We have, all this great stuff that comes out of Stanford and UC Berkeley because they're in the area. And what do they build? They build really people smart in science and math, right? So for me, that's kind of the bigger challenge is it wasn't to get on that negative, slope of we have to control pensions. It's like, hey, let's do this through growth. Let's get our state to understand that the return on investment can be 800 to 1.
Wow.
If we can move science scores up through better curriculum and actual science teachers who have a science background, right? Because, we have a lot of science teachers that are doing the best they can, but they didn't go to school to be science teachers. And they got moved into a program and we gave them permission to teach in an area out because they're saying, hey, we want to hire somebody with a high science background at a low income, right? It's like getting people to teach programming in a school. Mm-hmm. They'll go, well, if you could teach programming, why aren't you making that big job out there in the, in the computer industry? And I was at one of the local universities here, and I was talking to a person who was dealing with this redesignation of people and said, we're trying to convince kids that don't do well in biology, don't go to medical school, let's teach, because you probably won't get into medical school,
We have
right?
to make it an economic advantage to get into teaching. I'm also very aware that a lot of female teachers do the lower grades and a lot of male teachers do, and I don't know this is scientifically backed, so I think I'm
Mhm.
swagging this one,
Yeah,
but they go to the like the high school because they pay more. They pay more out the gate. You get paid more when you go to middle school and into high school, and those lower grades, they don't make a lot of money. You're better
right.
off going and working at Costco, literally Costco. No, shout out to Costco. Love you, love you, love you, love you. But you know what I'm saying? Like we also have different things that have happened here in the Bay Area. You were kind of bringing up like, hey, in San Mateo County alone, San Mateo County has been incredibly blessed, not only with the diversity of people who've moved here over the last 100 years, things like the Chinese Exclusion Act becoming illegal and being able to bring in people from, Eastern Asia, et cetera. But there was also a huge shift in California in banning anti-competes, right? So there used to be this unspoken rule that between Jobs and HP and those guys that you didn't hire from one
Yeah,
another, which kind of economically suppressed everything.
yeah. Or they
And then
made you
once
sign a document. Yeah.
they just had a document, you had these NDAs that you had to work at. And here we are kind of 30 years later. And I'm saying 30 years because you and I have both been working for at least 30 years.
Yeah.
Both of our boys were born in 95. So it's an easy
Yeah.
like kind of math to make. What an incredible opportunity. We now have open source software. We have Google. We no longer need to have a thesaurus at home. We have access to information, which is a crutch because we also have people who do not know how to discern
Well,
getting that much information at that
yeah.
velocity.
Kids can't read maps, right? I mean, they have no. I don't know if you even watch, like, nowadays there was the Great Race, or whatever it is, the TV show.
Yeah. I don't watch it, but yeah.
No, they can't use technology, so they get a map and they sit in the car and they go, literally, they're just spinning it. I have no idea how to read this map.
Again, shout out to the Cub Scouts. Sign your
Yeah,
kids up.
but I mean,
Learn
it's
there.
and so like, again, I'm a huge proponent for the technology revolution.
Yeah.
But when you think about what happened with COVID and the decrease in not general knowledge and what the impact on that will be 30 years from now, it's going to be not insignificant. And now we're going through another one where we've just unfunded hundreds of research labs. And I say to people all the time, they're going like, well, and I go, you're missing the point. Europe immediately countered it and put $500 million out to recruit and relocate scientists to Europe because it's just simple science. We're now one of the least preferred countries for scientists to want to move to if they're from another country because perception, fact, whatever, it doesn't matter. Recruiting became harder. And so we're going to have less qualified teachers, less qualified doctors. Right now, we don't even educate enough doctors in our country to fully house our medical facilities. That's why 25% of doctors are from other countries. Not because they're dumber or smarter, but because we have a need. We have a special deal with the Philippines for nurses, right? We get like 6,000 nurses, from the Philippines. We made a deal with them. I mean, we have so many H-1B visas, they're limited, but then we have these special categories where we allow even more. And I love that. I don't, but wouldn't it be great if we actually grew our own, right? It's like, hey, if you like what you're producing, why not just do a better job? And so for me, it's really about taking that 40% of kids that are scientifically proficient. And if we can move it up to 75, which sounds bizarre because we can't even move it 2%, but the impact on what goes on. And some of it is having those instructional cores, what I was calling good teachers, but those instructional cores get more solid, right? COVID gave us the benefit of allowing kids to have learning at home. So the kids who decide to take off with that are going to take off with that, right? The kids who decide not to, now some of that's an equity issue, but some of it is just not an equity issue, right? It's just an interest and effort. And so, there's a comedian who says, if you want to be a good patriot, do your math, do your homework. I say, if you want to be a good patriot, do your science, because that's how you're going to drive the economic pluses. And it really is what we're competing with. Kids in Korea, kids in India understand the value of science and math, and they're not looking or complaining about the instructional ability, sleeping with books. right? And so that's the difference. And again, I'm not advocating never going to a football game. I'm not advocating, but I'm just saying choices matter. And right now we have a choice. And if you have little ones, science and technology is going to help us more than some of the other focus areas. Doesn't make them less important, but if you're not being honest and fair to your children, if you're not saying, hey, if you major in a STEM and you graduate, you'll make more money.
Now, like, let's take a step back there because I love tying it into patriotism and really understanding that we're all in this together. But part of Americana is that Friday Night Lights opportunity. In order for us to capitalize on everything that we would love to have as being Americans and really making sure that we have access to proper education, we know that when you have money, you have the ability to, put your name on a sign up sheet for a preschool before you even have children. Like you just have down payments, all those things that go through. Do you have a recommendation on maybe moving up the introduction to STEM that might be able to offset and be able to have people, like, if we introduce it a lot earlier, would we then have the ability to then not have to worry about, like, if it's introduced later, then they have like this compact area of where they need to ingest it, but then it actually allows for them to play football or play badminton, whatever you feel like playing.
Well, so what I would say to you is, I'm going to frame it in the 12-year experience of education.
Okay.
Right. And I don't know if being proficient in 12th grade might be a high bar for what you really need to be functional, right? Like I have friends that went through engineering school and said, I took way more math than I ever needed. It was just like a hazing to take, higher levels of calculus. So to like lose people in the engineering program. And so I didn't need that now. I don't need it at all. What I learned that I use is this, and this, right? So I don't know if 12th grade science knowledge is too much. What I would say to you is in 12 years, we're getting 40% proficient, 45% proficient. So if I just do simple math, and I assume that we're gaining each year, but we're not, but I assume we are. Actually, our 5th grade proficient kids are more than our 8th grade proficient kids usually. So we're losing kids in the pipeline. So we have a leak. So the first thing I'd want to do is you want to increase the raw materials. You got to plug the leak, right? Mm-hmm. And that's about interest. And so I think you can do more things earlier that are more interesting for kids so they're more inquisitive. But I don't think you need to teach science curriculum earlier. You need
just
to
introduce it earlier.
Well, they need to hear exciting stories about what's going on inside. But right. But again, the problem is how many kids learn about genetics. You don't have to learn DNA to understand how cool genetics is when you hear stories about it. And you can have those stories be as young as you want, right? Yeah. As early as you want, right? I mean, and so I think that you can teach reading and you can teach early curriculum within a knowledge framework that improves that learning and engagement but right now we have like 70 to 80% of kids like science and math in 3rd and 4th grade. So we could double down. I mean, we spend 2.5 hours on average in reading a day, or 1.5. I think it's 1.5 in math, 2.5 in reading, and 20 minutes in science, and 20 minutes in social studies, and 20 minutes in gym a couple times a week. So when you look at what teachers spend their time on now, you could take that reading and you could say, let's make that reading be, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, about science themes, right? And so I think your point is well taken, but I think the interest in the field is great now up to 3rd or 4th grade. And then we lose kids who don't look like scientists, whose parents aren't scientists. And so we lose those two groups. So we lose girls, kids of color, and kids who don't have, the adequate equity in the background to understand them or to experience them or to interact. My little town where I grew up, we didn't have a doctor in our town. We didn't have a physician. Didn't exist.
You're making me think of that age group, though, and that age group is also when I did it, stopped going to after school care or stopped kind of getting that one-on-one time, after school. Once they get to be like 7 or 8, they have other things to do after school, whether it be baseball, soccer, Cub Scouts. They're having to juggle and they're deprioritizing school because we're introducing all of these other social dynamics.
But if you watch Moneyball, who's going to get the baseball jobs in 5 years?
Yeah, no, they will. Well, right
Yeah,
now it'll also be my Gemini model. How are you
yeah,
training your own, LLM
yeah.
right now?
No, but I mean, but in general, when you think about it, right? It's no longer going to be I played in the minors, and now I've got that's not going to cut it. If you can't do math, the kid who went to Yale who didn't play on the Yale baseball team is going to take your job
Yeah.
because I went to the Boston Celtics and I looked up the guy who I knew was going to ask me the science questions, right? And I was like, how did you get your job? He volunteered, right? He had the equity where he could volunteer and he wrote a blog and he did the math. I promise you, I don't know what part of the planet he would be on where he would play basketball. Maybe the Philippines, but it was definitely not any place where people on average are, above average in height,
Yeah.
right?
Actually, let's just pivot here then. Some of your work is working with some amazing athletes and institutions. How did you get into that, and what does that look like?
So I won't say accidentally because I have a love of sports, right?
Yeah, you do.
So so in college football, I got concussions, so I became fascinated with the brain and learning through my own inability post concussion to recover quickly, right? Couldn't watch TV, couldn't read a book, thought I was going to stay up with classwork, not even close, right? So that kind of turned me on to hey, there's this thing inside my box that if you mess with it, you're going to have a bad day. So we're building training programs for cognitive training for people with broken brains
Oh, that makes sense.
or poor
Yeah.
learning brains.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I hear that a famous NFL quarterback, many people say the GOAT,
Might be somebody from San Mateo County. Who knows?
might be who most people who are fans of the Niners don't like. And his sisters probably were the best athletes in his family, by the way. But in general, we heard that he was using the training program. And then he got on to something with a presentation in Santa Monica with Milken Institute or somebody, Mike Milken. And he starts discussing that he has a book coming out, The TB12 Way. And in that book, he's committed a chapter to the cognitive exercises he does to help him play at an elite level. And so in there, he talks about exercises that he does, some exercises which are older versions of what we built for kids, and which he said he thought he had a concussion. He went to go see his own specialist because that's what people do. And he went to, I think, Utah, and they said, well, you might, but you could actually train your brain to be a little bit tougher so that you either recover faster or maybe you don't get one as easily. And so he went out and sought the best, which was at UCSF Medical Center, my colleagues, my mentor and friends.
Yeah.
And he signed up for the program. And then he did a distribution license with them for what's called Brain HQ, the name of the product. And he actually advised kids to sign up on TB12 website. It's no longer available, but it was then. This is while he played. And kids could do his brain exercises. And then a friend of mine who works with the baseball player Alex Rodriguez called me and said, hey, Alex wants to know, he talked to Tom. The truth is, he said, Tom and his wife were meeting with Alex and J-Lo. And they were
you know how many years ago this was. I mean, if you're into
and they were talking about your program. And I literally said, I was like, I don't want to mention his name, but I was like, just stop talking for a second. J-Lo and Giselle heard my name, somehow, yeah. I said, and then he said, no, not your name at all. He said, not your name at all. Yeah. So, but in general, right, I was sitting there kind of going, and Alex had asked a question, and I sent some stuff. And so all of a sudden, elite athletes, through word of mouth, through Tom's chapter, because he has a chapter committed to it. And then we got the New York Times wrote that we were at LSU working with the LSU football team. I was there in July of 2019. And that was the year they were about to win the national championship. And we were looking at their brain activity in real time while they did cognitive tasks. So we could rack and stack these individuals who were anonymous to us. We didn't know their names. That was on purpose. So that we could give what would appear to be unbiased information to the coaching staff about the ability level of some of their first, second, and third team skill players. Now, this is a team that has 15 or 16 people get drafted, by the way, like the biggest number, I think, in the history of the NFL draft. tie with Ohio State and maybe Alabama, but still an enormous number of individuals. So, this is the team with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. And so, again, came into the room with a coach. I get a number, I run them. And what we discover, which we knew from other elite brains, special operators in the military, people who play Major League Baseball, right? And I'm sure you've seen it because you lived here when Barry Bonds was doing well, right?
Another Sarah graduate. Yeah.
You can drop that as much as you want. So
my kid didn't go to Sarah.
Yeah.
But I am proud of where we're from.
Yeah. And so, but it was this ability so when we look at testing, there are people who get up to perform well. Mm-hmm. And I think sports selects for that. If you can't get up when the pressure's on, you're not going to perform well. So that doesn't really differ among most individuals who are elite performers. You still do have people who get to a higher level. So some of the brains that I've tested personally, the ones that do really, really well they have better brains than others, period. Maybe better brains than super geniuses in math. I don't know, but I would assume they're about the same. So great athletes have great brains, number one. And there's things that they do better than everybody else. And I can give you, like when you talk about attention span, right? The guy who has the most steals in the NBA, right, has the ability to focus and switch faster than anybody else. Now you can call that ADHD, or you can call that leads the NBA in steals. It's right. But in general, right, they have an amazing brain at the ability to change where their focus is, perceive a region, and importantly, not waste energy when they don't need it. So when you watch LeBron James put a towel over his face or talk about meditation, when you hear people talk about meditation, it is being able to rest their brain on purpose. So when they need to expand brain energy, it's left for them. And so it's about getting up and then getting down. So you'll hear people talk about, what do you hear with Navy SEALs? Oh, they have a way to fall asleep right away. Why? Because they might only get 12 minutes to sleep. And they want to get 11 minutes of sleep in the 12 minutes they have, right? Or they have box breathe. They have breathed in a particular way so they can calm their vagus nerve, right? And the vagus nerve will either increase arousal or decrease it. It's under their control, but you have to practice it. It's not that they're just good at it. It's that somebody taught them how to do it and they practice it and they practice it. And so when you see Michigan in the playoffs and you see their quarterback sitting down and meditating with headphones on, when you see Kirk Cousins putting an EEG strap on his head, sitting in his car, watching a video that he changes the brightness of or the speed of based on his thinking, he's getting his brain ready for the intensity of a training that he's about to go through. This stuff is now, some people will say it's their secret weapon, but this is the new way. And they said it actually in the quarterback Netflix special. Is this the future? And he said, oh, absolutely. So now you have a Tom Brady using brain exercises, right? You have Alex Rodriguez learning about it. You have Kirk Cousins using it. You have LeBron James using meditation, which is about, again, training your brain, right? You have Russell Wilson, who was famous for his focus and meditation. He used the replay video screen to help, everybody has a calming point. So it's like, look somewhere, be somewhere else for a second, control your breathing, reduce your heart rate. Why? Because you only have so much energy and you want to expand it when you want to expand it. And Barry Bonds could step up, get out of that dugout. Somebody could say something. He could smile, he could look, and then he could turn and he'd watch one warm-up pitch and he was eye of the tiger guy, right? And
I was a lucky girl because in my career of working at all these really great companies, at the height of his, home run kind of goal, I was at FSN Bay Area. So I got to be a part of sports broadcasting and watching and the excitability, even with the asterisk that's associated with him. You couldn't teach that performance, that his performance was still his performance and his ability to connect. But I do want to ask you, do you meditate? How often do you or do you do daily meditations, or is this something that you've done kind of later, or have you always been into meditation?
I started in college when I had an injury.
Okay.
And so I learned progressive muscle relaxation as my technique so that I could decrease the pain in a particular part of my body. Mm-hmm. and then I could, kind of like focus and unfocus. And then I found out that it helped me fall asleep really quickly.
Yeah, me too.
And and so right, so many people are like, I can't fall asleep, and I'm like, I can't remember the last, like, if that happens to me once a year, like where I can't fall asleep, like, it's now I might wake up and have a hard time going back to sleep, but breathing, meditating, and so it's the ability to unfocus. Now we know from Harvard researchers that focused relaxation increases creativity. So right, it allows you, again, you're letting your brain loose, right? So that it can problem solve later and do other things later that otherwise it would kind of get in a tonic state of tension. And so meditation is kinds of meditation, right? There's different kinds for different goals. For me, progressive muscle relaxation was a way for me to get through football season and still lift weights and still go to sleep and still do other things and have a huge bruise on my foot and no flexibility, like there were things that you could, but the belief was you could control the amount of blood flow, right? If you can control your heart rate and you can control your breathing, you can selectively learn to relax parts of your body and they don't hurt as much. And I believe that.
Have you done any research into meditation in the younger grades and how that can lay a foundation, or has that not been part of what you guys?
So I haven't done that. What I will so I will tell you two things. So first of all, and you, my younger son, I still believe meditates almost daily. And again, for the same goals. I know that my older one did a little bit, but I don't know how much he does it on a regular basis. But in general,
Yeah.
right, it is a technique that you have in your toolkit. And so the problem with schools or with even athletic teams is that most of them, when they get to a high level, it is like a buffet. So it's literally, I don't know if they walk in and there's a sketchboard that'll say like what the activities of the day are. So it'd be like pitchers, get your throwing in,
I don't know.
lot A, team meeting, 9 o'clock, like there's things to do, go to the gym, work out, it's not a lot of free time, but they'll say things like, team meditation 12 to 12:20, and what happens is you're sitting down walking down to meditation and out comes a physical therapist and goes, Jen, did you want to get an extra therapy in, right? So it's really kind of like you can walk in as a group or you cannot. Now the Buffalo Bills had a defensive back group last year where they meditated as a group a couple times a week and they talked about it on TV because for them it was a bonding exercise. Now again, I won't say a little known fact, but a researched fact is that if we show similar expressions and our breathing is in sync, which we can control, we like everybody who's doing it. So it is a bonding.
It's kind of like a yawn.
Well, so I want you to think about it from a species perspective. Mm-hmm. If we're sharing an environment and we perceive our partners, our mates in the world, our similar species elements to all be smiling and to be breathing together, we're probably having a shared experience, and that builds a positive bond. And so when you talk about engineering teams, etc., the idea that you can teach them some breathing techniques and some relaxation techniques together is a way for them to become more productive. So, if you want to say like, what's the miracle for high performance? It would be sleep, which is a private event, right? But group meditation is probably the best group event that you can do to enhance innovation. Now, there's things you can change structurally within a company, like you can reward them for innovating. There's things that you could do, but I mean, in general, to increase somebody's capability to be productive in that domain, there's team things that you can do. I would say group meditation would be one of them, and then anything that you can do to have normal sleep, right? Not alcohol induced.
I love this. All right, so let's we're going to switch over to some fun questions now.
So,
if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Wow. If I could have a superpower, I think I would want to have total recall memory.
Oh.
Just to give you a different one. I'm not going to be invisible, not going to be able to throw fire, but just could never be wrong when I recall something.
Nice.
So I want to be able to
understand
benefit
everybody.
maximally. Yeah. I want to be able to maximally benefit from my experiences.
I love it. You were talking about watching documentaries. Is there one that you recommend that people should watch?
There is one done by, I always hate when I forget actors' names, but there's the Australian brothers who are
The Hemsworth.
Hemsworths who do action movies, and the one Hemsworth boy,
Chris.
man, I guess he's been identified as having a gene for Alzheimer's. And so he does a documentary on human performance and cognitive performance. And I think that that's a good one to look at, where he's both trying to think about living his life fully while still making good choices about having good longevity of his health. But I can't remember what it was called.
I can tell you it's Limitless.
Limitless. There you go.
Limitless.
Thanks.
I too am in love with Dr. Peter Attia. I think his book is right behind me somewhere. And trying to incorporate some of those things. If you had to invent a new flavor of ice cream, what would it be?
So I would add more caffeine to my chocolate. I always look for cognitive performance. So I literally have spoken to people just in the past 2 or 3 weeks about what could we do to coffee, or what could we do to ice cream that would improve cognitive performance better than what we're currently doing, right? So coffee right now, if you take it, it has probably a 20-minute load up time. It's a diuretic, and you can't easily come down from it. So I'm probably giving away a big secret here. So the question isn't, again, I don't want to know how to go up better. I want to know how to bring it down faster. So the issue is I want to have a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. And then I want to be able to take something that negates the impact of the caffeine for rest and recovery.
I love it. Final question. At this point, what would the title of your autobiography be? Or maybe just the first edition, because I'm assuming you might have a few.
The title of my biography, of my Dutch Boy.
Okay.
Because I'm from Pennsylvania, Dutch part of Pennsylvania.
I love it.
And it completely, like any place else, it completely structured my biases and my both implicit and explicit, as well as, kind of the idea that a work ethic is something of value. Work-life balance is relegated to a second tier, and I don't ever feel guilty about that, and I probably should.
Yeah, we sometimes we still battle over that stuff. But Steve, this was wonderful. Thank you. It was really great to catch up.
Thank you. It's great to catch up with you too.
Will be great.